If you're looking for the perfect plant-based centerpiece for your holiday dinner, look no further than this amazing vegan lentil and mushroom Wellington. This was my very first time making this, and I can say it definitely won't be my last. I've never made this before because it always seemed too intimidating and difficult, but turns out you don't have to be a chef to make this. Let's get started. Before we jump into the video, I have a very exciting announcement that I have 2 upcoming vegan trips in 2025 in both of my countries, and you are invited. So the first trip is right in my backyard in the Canadian Rockies in August. We're gonna be hiking and camping in one of the most beautiful places in the world. We're gonna stay in the iconic Banff National Park and visit beautiful sites like Lake Louise and Moraine Lake, take the Banff gondola ride up Sulphur Mountain, and soak in the luxurious Kananaskis Nordic Spa, and of course so much more. And the second trip is a vegan tour in my home country of South Korea in October. We're going to be visiting 3 iconic cities, Seoul, Busan, and Gyeongju, and we'll stay overnight at a Buddhist temple, do a vegan kimchi making class, a yacht tour, visit UNESCO heritage sites, and of course eat tons of delicious vegan Korean food. Both trips will be linked in the description below, so check them out to see all the details and make sure you book now to secure your spot. There are limited spots available, so make sure you act fast, and see you in Canada or Korea, or hopefully both. Before you start, make sure you have your puff pastry thawed out so it's ready to use. This is a step that I know I would probably forget, and then you're screwed, so that's why I'm reminding you. Alright, now we can actually start. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and then let's get started on roasting the butternut squash. If you want to use pre-peeled and chopped butternut squash, you could definitely do that, and you could also use sweet potato instead. I'm using a whole butternut squash, and this is a little hack to make it easier to peel and cut the squash. First, poke a few holes into the squash with a fork or a knife, then microwave for about 3 to 4 minutes, and this will soften the squash just enough to make it way easier to peel and cut. Just make sure you let it cool down to the touch first before peeling it and cutting it, and you can cut off the ends. And I also like to cut the wide part separately so that it's easier to peel. To seed it, you can just use a fork. I actually like to use a spoon to scoop out the inside, and then you can kind of cut these pieces into small bite-sized pieces. We're gonna actually roast this in the oven, so if you want it to cook faster, then you can cut it into smaller pieces. I know this part is a little bit annoying and time consuming, so if you do want to make this easier for yourself, just buy some pre-cut, pre-peeled, pre-chopped butternut squash. You could also find butternut squash frozen as well, so you could just thaw it out and then you could just mash it in instead of doing this whole thing. But this is, you know, it's Christmas, okay? We can be lazy for the rest of the year and then have one day where we make a nice centerpiece. So yeah. And now we're gonna place the butternut squash pieces on a lined baking sheet, and we're gonna coat the pieces with olive oil, salt, and pepper. And for this recipe, I only need half the butternut squash, or about 400 grams. So for the rest of the butternut squash, you could save it and use it in a different recipe, or you could do this exact thing with the rest and just roast the butternut squash and just kind of enjoy that as like a side dish as well. So those are some options for you. And when you're ready, you can just spread out the pieces nicely, and we're gonna bake this in the oven for around 30 to 40 minutes at 400 degrees or until they're very tender. Now do that part first before you start chopping and preparing any other ingredients, because during the time that it bakes in the oven, you can actually prepare basically everything else. So you don't need to do all of the peeling and chopping beforehand. Just do the butternut squash first, then do the veggies and all the other stuff, okay? Just like I'm doing here. So what I'm doing now is preparing the onion, carrot, and celery by peeling them and washing and then cutting into chunks, because I'm going to use the food processor to dice them. Now, if you are not lazy like me, you can dice this by hand, but I do have a food processor for a reason. So we're going to start with the onion. I'm going to dice the onion with just a few pulses in the food processor, and then we're going to set that aside. And also, if I didn't already have minced garlic, which I always have because of my garlic hack, and if you haven't followed my garlic hack yet, what have you been doing? Watch that video for the garlic hack so you can always have minced garlic. Anyways, if you haven't followed that hack yet and you don't have minced garlic, you could also just throw in some peeled garlic into the food processor along with the onion. So I would do that if I didn't already have minced garlic, which I always do because of my garlic hack. Anyways, check that video out. That'll be linked below. Next, we're going to dice the carrot and celery together in the food processor as well, and then we're going to set that aside too. And for whatever reason, I didn't use the food processor method to dice my mushrooms. I think it's because I wanted the mushrooms in slightly larger chunks, and the food processor will definitely just kind of, pulverize it, if you will. But you can use the food processor for the mushrooms as well. That's an option, okay? And now let's add a little olive oil onto a nonstick pan, and we are going to start cooking up the vegetables. But while that olive oil is heating up in the pan, you can now open up your can of lentils, drain and rinse thoroughly. And then I'm going to use about 3/4 of the lentils, put that into the food processor once again, and we are going to mash. Okay, now if you're not using a food processor in general, then you can just mash with like a fork or a potato masher, okay? And now we are ready to bring out the large mixing bowl, and we're going to add the mashed lentils into the large mixing bowl along with the non-mashed lentils. This just creates a little bit of a difference in texture and just makes the dish a little bit more interesting. At this point, the oil should have heated up nicely, so we are going to cook up the diced onion, and we're just going to saute that for a couple of minutes on the pan. And while that's cooking, I'm just going to quickly crush up some walnuts. Now, these were already chopped walnuts, but I just wanted them more finely chopped. So yeah, basically you just want some finely chopped walnuts. You can use whole walnuts and just throw them in the food processor, or you can buy walnuts that were already chopped and you can use that, or you can even finely chop them. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, throw the walnuts into the mixing bowl along with the lentils. And now we are ready to cook the carrots and the celery. We have added that into the pan along with the onion and cook that for a minute or so. And then we're going to add in our minced garlic along with some sage and thyme. And we're going to cook that for another couple of minutes. And now the veggies are ready to join the gang in the large mixing bowl. Now don't wash that pan just yet. We're going to go back to that pan, add a little more oil, and then we are going to saute the mushrooms. So we're going to just cook up the mushrooms, let them sweat, let them cook nicely for a few minutes. I like to add a little bit of salt on the mushrooms to help them sweat it out, And when the mushrooms are nicely cooked, you can feel free to allow them to join the pâté in the bowl. Now, this part is optional, but I wanted to add some depth and flavor with some miso paste. So I'm just taking a tablespoon of miso paste in a small bowl along with a tablespoon of warm water, and we are just going to break that apart and just kind of mix it so that the miso paste kind of thins out. Because last thing you need is a chunk of miso in your Wellington. But yes, you may skip the miso, and if you do, you may need to add more salt later on to the filling, but I'll let you know when, okay? Now, at this point, the butternut squash is probably done. Just make sure it is very tender. I actually think I undercooked mine just a little bit. It was a little bit hard to mash, okay? So it should be very tender and very easy to mash. So yeah, if it's not yet, then just throw it back in the oven and let it cook a little bit more. So we're just going to mash everything together either with a fork or with a potato masher or whatever. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly mashed and everything is great. It can have some chunks. I feel like the chunks make it more interesting and delicious. You don't want like a paste, okay? So don't make a paste. We're making a delicious, chunky filling. And at the end, we're going to add some salt and pepper, and feel free to mix that all up and make sure at this point, give it a taste, okay? Make sure it is salty to your liking. Everyone has a different saltiness preference. So add a little more salt if you need to. If you don't. And now we can make the Wellington. Now we can put it all together. So remember that puff pastry that you have thawed already because I told you to? We're gonna roll it out. Now I am using a vegan-friendly puff pastry that I found. I think the brand was a Tender Flake, yes. It actually has 2 smaller puff pastry sheets. So I'm actually using both, okay? I didn't think I would need both, but here we are. I needed both. So I'm rolling both of them out to the best of my ability. Now, this is my first time working with puff pastry, but it's actually quite forgiving. It's not like super difficult to work with, which I was afraid of. So anyway, I'm placing the 2 rolled out puff pastry sheets side by side, overlapping one another so that it creates one big one. I'm placing that on a lined baking sheet. I'm actually using the same liner, the same like parchment paper as I did for the butternut squash. I actually have a reusable liner, but I just can't find it. I don't know where it went. Anyway, I highly recommend getting a reusable baking sheet liner thing. Okay, I googled it. Apparently it's called a baking mat. Anyway, that's besides the point. We are going to take the filling and we're going to create like this log shape. As you see here, we're going to pack it down into the center of this giant puff pastry sheet. And then I'm going to take the puff pastry sheet and I'm going to cut with some kitchen scissors these sort of slits on the sides. And then we're going to fold up the pastry at the ends. Now, if there's some excess, you can just set that aside, and I saved mine to use for something. I'm not sure what. Okay. Anyway, fold up the ends at the top and the bottom, and then using a crisscross pattern, you're going to fold each of the slits over the middle of the log, one side at a time. So like crisscross until the whole thing is covered. Now, again, you don't have to be a master at this. As you can see, mine doesn't look perfect, but it's still going to turn out pretty good. Okay. This isn't the Food Network. You're watching Cheap Lazy Vegan, okay? And now we're gonna brush the whole thing with some melted vegan butter, or you can use olive oil. And when you are ready, you can bake this at 400 degrees Fahrenheit in the oven for around 35 to 40 minutes or until it is nice and golden. And if you're serving this with maybe a side of roasted veggies, you can also roast your veggies at the same time as you are roasting this delicious Wellington. So yeah, feel free to do that if you want to. And in the meantime, you can feel free to make a vegan gravy. Now, I am not making vegan gravy from scratch. I'm using this Swiss Chalet home-style gravy. This was vegan friendly. Yes, my friends, you can make your own vegan gravy from scratch, but like, let's be honest, I'm already making a Wellington. I am not about to make my own vegan gravy, okay? My name is not Nara Smith, okay? So thank you, Swiss Chalet. Anyway, here is my Wellington. I could have probably baked it a bit longer to make it more golden on the outside, but doesn't that look gorgeous? Oh my gosh, it looks just divine. And let me tell you, it tastes divine. Okay, so I do recommend letting this cool for at least 10 minutes or maybe a little bit longer before you start cutting it, because the inside is going to be a little bit more soft in the beginning when it's like really hot, but it will kind of become more solidified, if you will, when you let it cool down for a little bit. I was impatient, of course, as always, so I cut it a bit too early, but it's okay. Anyway, you're going to top that with gravy, serve that with whatever veggies or whatever sides you made, and oh my god, my friends, I don't know why I've never made this before. It was so good. And it was a lot easier than I thought. It's kind of like making a lentil or nut loaf and then just wrapping it around in puff pastry, which makes it even better. So delicious. I think it would make the perfect plant-based centerpiece. I think meat lovers would love this as well. It's just so delicious. It's pretty healthy. It's got protein. It's got healthy fats, lots of veggies, and just deliciousness. So make sure you try it. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. The blog post will be below with the full recipe and ingredients list, so check that out. And if you enjoy it, give me a 5-star review on my recipe. And guys, don't forget to check out my trips to the Canadian Rockies and to South Korea. They'll be linked below, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Happy holidays!